to move. With that being said, State, ready for your opening statement?
Yes, Judge.
Thank you. Proceed when ready.
Judge, if you've got a PowerPoint. Good morning. This is James David Barron. He went by David, and so that's what we're going to call him here. He was 68 years old when his life tragically came to an end at the hands of his girlfriend, the defendant, Suzanne Mericle, when she shot him, when she became unhinged and shot him in a fit of rage. Now, David and Suzanne had begun dating back in 2019. And it was a brief relationship then. They stayed in touch, and they reconnected over the years. They reconnected in the spring of 2024. The defendant was a dentist. She had a practice on St. Simon's Island, and David was an executive for a company that did construction for airports. He had two adult children, 3 grandchildren at the time of his death, and now there's 2 more grandchildren. When they reconnected in the spring of 2024, they began dating again, and it went at a much faster pace. They started dating, and they even went on vacation together with David's family to the beach. So the defendant went on the family vacation in August to the beach with them. The relationship progressed, and then in October of 2024, they bought this home together on Lake Lanier. So they bought the home, and the defendant was still working in her practice on St. Simon's Island with an eye towards retiring and coming to live here at the lake house with David. So on March 7th, 2025, things had become a little tense. And, but the day started out as a good day. It started out as a good day. They went to the Olive Garden, they ate, they came back, they were still settling in their new home. They were unpacking boxes, they were putting together furniture. That night they watched a movie. And we don't know a whole lot about the events that led up to the shooting that occurred late that night, early in the morning hours of March the 8th. But what the evidence will show is that the defendant had become aware that David had remained in contact with a woman from his past, a woman named Lilia, who she thought was from Romania, but was actually lives in Moldova. And David had been sending Lilia money, and the defendant was understandably upset about that. But it became something of an obsession with her. She couldn't let it go. She was constantly confronting David about it, and they were constantly fighting about it. So on the night of March 7th, 2025, what we do know, and what the evidence will show, what the physical evidence will show, is that David retreated upstairs. So in this lake house, the master bedroom is downstairs. The evidence will show that David had retreated upstairs to a guest bedroom. He had retreated to the guest bedroom, closed the door, locked the door behind him. The evidence will show that the defendant got her gun and that she came upstairs and that she fired that gun into the door where David was standing, behind the door and to the side. That she got her gun, which was a Glock 9mm, she got her gun and was holding the gun so that the muzzle was around 6 inches away from the surface of the door. And she fired that gun at a sideways angle. It went through the door, it went through the corner of the wall. And David was blading himself to the side of the door in a defensive position. And the bullet hit him in the left arm, slightly above the elbow. In the left arm, it came out the same arm, went into his chest, traveled through his left lung, and hit his thoracic aorta, and then went into the right side, fractured a rib, and kind of came to rest on the other side of his chest. So almost immediately when that happened, the defendant is on the other side of the door. She hears the impact of the bullet. She hears David make a noise, sort of like a grunt as it hits him. It hits him, and he falls forward on his face, and he falls forward in a position where he is on top of his right hand. He's right-handed. He falls on top of his right hand. His left hand is out to his side. And the defendant went to the garage and got a hammer and hammered holes into the door until she could reach in, unlock the door. So she reached in and unlocked the door, and instead of rendering medical aid or trying to resuscitate David, she goes into damage control mode. She gets David's Beretta, and she takes that Beretta and she puts it in a position on the floor or near the floor, near where his left hand is, and she fires that gun. She has some problems initially getting the gun to fire because it's not her gun. She's not familiar with it. Some live rounds come out of the gun. She fires the gun, and the gun goes through what is now the open doorway out into the foyer of the home, hitting a metal baluster, hitting a wood banister, and then going out and hitting the wood. There's a wood, I think it's called a batten wall in the foyer. So it hits and nicks that wall. We think she fired 2 to 3 shots based on the evidence. A shot went all the way through the glass, and that projectile was never found. The shot that hit the wood may have ricocheted off the wood and then caused a defect in the glass, but there's fragments from the bullets in various places all throughout the house. So she had taken David's gun, she had taken it out of the holster, she had thrown the holster on the bed, gotten the gun, and done that. And then she began wiping up the blood. But before she started wiping up the blood, she took the shell casings that came from both guns and flushed them, and the projectiles that she found, the live rounds that had fallen out, she flushed them down the toilet. She flushed them down the toilet, and they were later recovered in the septic line. Then she calls 911 around 1:11 or so. She talks to them for a few minutes, doesn't give them a lot of information that's about what's going on. I don't think that call she even gives her address. She hangs up after about a minute and a half or so. Then she tries to make a call to her sister. Her sister doesn't answer, But then there's 6 minutes between when she gets off the first 911 call and she calls 911 for a second time. And then when the police come, she's not out there waiting on the steps, anxious for help. She is upstairs wiping up the blood with towels. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about the charges so that you know what to be looking for and what the state has to prove as we present the evidence to you in this case. Now, because of the defendant's actions that night, she's charged with malice murder in count 1. So she's charged with malice, causing the death of James Barron by shooting him and killing him. And then in counts 2 to 3, those are felony murder counts. And so we have charged him with 2 different felony murders with 2 counts of felony murder because she committed felony murder in 2 different ways. She committed 2 different felonies, either of which or both of which could cause the death of David Barron. So when you commit a felony, and in the process of committing that felony, and somebody is killed, that's felony murder. So here in count 4, the defendant is charged with aggravated assault for assaulting James Barron with a deadly weapon, which is a firearm, which is an object which, when used offensively, is likely to or does result in serious bodily injury, by firing the gun through a door in the direction of James Barron. So then the second felony count is criminal damage in the first degree. And so what you can be looking for to view the evidence in regards to this count is that the defendant knowingly and without authority interfered with the door in a manner so as to endanger human life by shooting the door of a room that was occupied by a person, that being James David Barron. In count 6, the defendant is charged with possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. And so what you need to be looking for in regards to whether the state has proven that count is that we proved that the defendant had a gun on her person or in her possession, and that she used that gun to commit the crime of aggravated assault, which was the crime of shooting the gun through the door in the victim's direction. So in the final count, the defendant is charged with tampering with evidence. And so what she's charged with doing here is knowingly concealing physical evidence, that being the shell casings and the bullets, with the intent to obstruct the prosecution. Sometimes it's prosecution of another. In this case, it's the prosecution of herself. So basically, she flushed the shell casings and the bullets down the toilet in order to hide evidence of her crime. So in order to prove these charges to y'all, the state will be calling witnesses, and we will be presenting evidence through the testimony of the witnesses and some of the physical evidence that the witnesses will present on the stand. So the first witness you're going to hear from is Deputy Zachary Martin. He was the first responding officer on the scene. He had another officer with him, and when they arrived on the scene, they came up to the house in the dark, but it was lit up on the inside. And the deputies were shining their flashlights into the door. Deputy Martin went around to the side of the house to check on things while Deputy Thomas was pounding on the door and yelling sheriff's office and shining his flashlight in that door. The defendant did not come to the door, and at one point, Deputy Martin saw her come down the stairs and then turn around and go back up the stairs, and he sees her through the foyer window, can see through the foyer window that she is in the bedroom and crouching down, appearing to be doing something, which once he goes inside, sees that she's got the towels and then she's wiping up the blood. So you're going to hear from Deputy Martin And you are going to see some footage from his body cam about what they saw when they first walked in the house. So I'm going to play just a small portion of what they saw when they first walked into the crime scene.
She came from in here. He's on his face down.
2024 Kia Telluride, James Fair, that address.
There's a hallway with an open door on the left.
Second.
Check on him.
Porsche, Macon, black in color.
Yep.
Department Sam Henry Charlie, 4742.
There, and then I'll take this room. Good.
There's a closet over here.
Okay.
It's clear. All right. I don't have a pulse on him.
So that's what they saw. They saw David Barron lying on his face, blood everywhere, the gun next to his hand, bloody towels, and all of that. So after you hear from Deputy Martin, you're going to hear from Deputy Richard Thomas. So he was the deputy that was there, that was with Deputy Martin. He was knocking on the door, and so Deputy Martin's role was more looking over the crime scene and staying with the paramedics to make sure the crime scene wasn't disturbed. Now, Deputy Thomas's role there was staying with the defendant and keeping an eye on her. So you're going to hear some statements that the defendant made to Deputy Thomas while they were just sitting outside on the porch. Some voluntary, spontaneous utterances and statements that she made about what had happened that night. So listen for these statements when you're watching his body cam. And the statements are important. Listen for those statements and then listen how they compare to the statements she later gave in the interview, and also think about those statements when you're seeing and hearing the evidence about the physical evidence on the scene, because it just simply, you will see from the evidence that it does not add up. So what statements did she make to Deputy Thomas? He grabbed my neck. She's talking about David. She's saying, David grabbed my neck. David made me go upstairs. He tried to shoot me, and he shot at me. I got dragged down the stairs, and then I got my gun. We got into a fight a couple weeks ago, and I decided to drive home. And that is, she's talking about a separate incident that we'll talk about briefly in just a minute. And then she's also talking about the separate incident where she left the house and got a DUI. And she's saying, he made me leave the house. Then also, she says to Deputy Thomas that David dragged me up the stairs. He said he was going to kill me. I said he'd been drinking too much. He said he'd shoved the gun down my throat. I was walking up the stairs, and he said, stay away, and he shot the gun. I tried to shoot the doorknob off, or I tried to shoot the lock off. She says this 9 different times, that that's what she was trying to do to Deputy Thomas, that she was trying to shoot the doorknob or the lock off of that closed door. Now, in addition to Deputy Thomas, you're going to hear from Investigator Matthew Medford. This is him sitting at the table with us today. He's the lead investigator on the case. And one of his roles as the lead investigator was to interview the defendant. So At the sheriff's office, at the law enforcement center, he sat down with the defendant and talked to her about what had happened. And so here's some of the statements that she made during that interview, and I want you to listen for them we'll play the interview for you. And so you be listening for these things. She said that, now she's talking about an incident that happened on February 16th, an earlier incident, that she went upstairs and laid there for 3 hours and couldn't go to sleep. So then I thought, I'm just going to go to St. Simon's. So I got up and got dressed and got all my stuff and put it in the car, and then I went upstairs. He had the door locked, and I said I was leaving. So, and we'll talk some more about that incident in a minute. We keep getting in big fights because of this woman being Lilia, the woman that he is having contact with and sending money to. He said, I got your phone and your journal, and I was going up the stairs to get them. So this is in relation to the incident that night of the shooting. She's saying that he had his phone, had her phone and his journal, and that she was going upstairs to get those items when the shooting occurred. Also be listening for this, and keep this in mind as you view the evidence and as you listen to the testimony. She told Investigator Mefford, we'd never gotten like this, ever, ever, ever. So things had never, ever, ever gotten that bad as it was that night. She says David was drinking too for a long time, Jack Daniels and maybe some beer. And then she admitted that she flushed 2 to 3 live rounds down the toilet downstairs in the master bedroom. She said that she denied picking up her shell casing from when she fired her Glock. She denied shooting a gun towards the stairs, and she said his gun was right there on the floor with my phone. She also then says, I don't think he shot his gun, I shot my gun. And she says, he didn't shoot me at all. He never shot his gun. So lots of contradictory statements to listen for coming from the defendant. And these are significant because she's saying that he never shot his gun, but then she had said earlier to Deputy Thomas that he shot at her as she was coming up the stairs. So listen for the inconsistencies. She said the holster was on the floor. I don't know why I went and got my gun. She denied picking up the shell casing. She had an injury to her hand that's sometimes referred to as slide bite. Some of y'all that have guns know what, when sometimes if you rack it, you're not holding it right, you can get cut right there. And she said she got that from playing with his gun downstairs because he had asked her to hold his gun and see if it fit her hand. That was one of the statements that she made to Deputy Mefford. She also said in reference to the fact that she had stated that she was going upstairs just to get her phone because he had her phone. It's just a phone, I know better. She also said, I said, give me my phone. And she also said, I should have just let him keep my phone. She told Mefford, I was waiting for the police and sitting on the stairs. And so be thinking about that when you watch Deputy Martin's body cam. And they come to the door and it takes her almost 2 minutes to come to the door. She told Mefford, I was waiting for the police and was sitting on the stairs. She said, I wasn't trying to shoot him. And she said to Investigator Mefford, I was just trying to shoot the doorknob off. She said, either that, sometimes she said, or she would say it, I was trying to shoot the lock off, but 19 times she says that to Investigator Mefford. So be listening for that in your interview. And be watching for this. Although she is acting dramatic and hysterical, when she's talking to Deputy Thomas and Investigator Mefford, look for any tears. See if you can see any actual tears coming out of her eyes during either of those statements. So we also expect to hear from Sergeant Cameron Durham. He is our crime scene investigator. He has been a crime scene investigator in Hall County for 25 years. And so we're going to go through with him. He took pictures of all the things at the crime scene. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of the evidence and the crime scene through Sergeant Durham. So one of the important things that he took a picture of, this is the door that the defendant shot through. And so this is the door. The door is open in this picture, so it's not like it was when the evidence will show that the gun was fired, but it's just open for the purpose of taking the measurement and taking the picture. So you'll see, and Investigator Durham will testify that where his finger is right around where the bullet went through the door. So this is the side that she shot through from the outside. And you heard all those statements, or you will hear all the statements about how she was trying to shoot the doorknob and shoot the door lock off. Well, the bullet, you'll hear, the evidence will show, went into the door 8 inches above that. So that's what he's pointing to in that picture. When the muzzle of the gun was only 6 inches away from the door. And so in this picture, you can see better the bullet hole. And if you look really close, you can see some little black speckles around the hole. That's called stippling. And Investigator Durham will tell you that what that indicated to him was that the defendant had been standing about 6 inches away from the door when the muzzle was 6 inches away from the surface of the door when she shot at David. You're going to see pictures of the trajectory. So this is the inside of the door. This is the other side of the door. So this rod here indicates the path of the bullet. It came at a sideways angle through the door, nicked that wall, and then went around and kept going in that direction. And you're going to hear Investigator Durham, in his opinion, that David was standing about right here when he was shot and killed. Now you're going to hear about the holster on the bed. You're going to hear that the evidence will show that the defendant had picked up the holster and already had blood on her hands. When she picked up the holster and she unsnapped the holster and she got David's gun out of the holster to shoot it out to make it look like self-defense. So she took the holster and she threw it on the bed, and then she got the gun out and David's gun out and started firing it. So that's the holster. You're going to hear that there was blood on the holster. The holster was there. A sample was taken. A swab was taken from the holster, and it was sent to the crime lab. And the crime lab found it positive for blood on the holster. And then you're going to hear evidence about the outward trajectory of the shots that the defendant fired from the Beretta. So this picture, the yellow dowel rod, shows the direction of the bullet as it came outwards through the open door and into the foyer. And this is a picture of the other angle of that. Investigator Durham will testify that the projectile hit the metal rod, and he doesn't know if it was the same projectile that hit the metal rod and the wood banister, or if it's two different. He's just trying to show the general direction that the shots were fired in. So from a low level on the ground, and then they came outward, hitting the wood, and then hitting, you can see here there's a defect in the wood, and then holes in the glass. And then the rounder hole is one, I believe that investigator Durham will testify that they never could locate the projectile that went through that. And so this is a still shot that you're going to see from Deputy Martin's body cam that shows the position of the victim, Mr. Barron, when the first responding officers got on the scene right before the paramedics started trying the life-saving measures on him. And it shows the bloody towels where the defendant left them. It shows the gun on top of the blood. And that is another picture of the towels, Mr. Barron's Beretta that the evidence will show was fired and left set there by the defendant, and that's the hammer that she used to get in the door. And then you can see the bloody footprints. Investigator Durham will testify about the bloody footprints from the defendant going into the bathroom and flushing the casings and 2 live rounds down the toilet, not from the master bedroom, but from the upstairs bedroom, the upstairs guest bedroom where she killed Mr. Barron. Now this picture you're gonna hear about, it is important because this is the kitchen, but they had to cut a hole in the ceiling of the kitchen, and up above that is the toilet where the shell casings and the projectiles were flushed. And so they enlisted the help of a septic tank professional who helped them get there in the septic tank. They had taken the toilet out in the guest bedroom where Mr. Barron was. They had taken the toilet out. They put the camera down the pipe and found one of the live rounds up there. And so they got it out from the pipe that was right under the toilet in the upstairs bathroom. And that's a picture of the round that they recovered out of that pipe. There was one more live round that was found further down the line, more underneath the house, and then 2 shell casings that had moved further along that were in the septic tank line. And so we expect that to be evidence that we show concerning the tampering with evidence. And so that's where they got shell casings out of the line. This is, I expect you're going to see a picture of the live rounds. So it turned out to be there were a total of 4 live rounds that were ejected from the Beretta that the defendant was trying to manipulate in some way and just wasn't operating it correctly when she was firing those shots outward. So she did flush 2 that she found down the toilet, but then there were 2 that she did not find that were maybe had lodged underneath Mr. Barron's body or something like that, because they after the paramedics came and the crime scene investigator came, they found this one, and then they found this. And what you'll notice about this live round is that it was found on top of the packaging that went in that came in the transport bag that they ended up carrying Mr. Barron out in. So it had gotten kicked out of something, or it had come loose from somewhere, and so the defendant had actually missed those 2 live rounds when she was concealing the evidence and flushing it down the toilet. So in addition to Sergeant Durham, our crime scene investigator, you're going to hear some witnesses from the GBI. You're going to hear from Bryson Miller. He's going to tell you that he tested that sample of blood that investigator Durham took from the holster, and it was positive for blood. You're going to hear from Martin Gravely. He's a firearms examiner with the GBI, and he looked at both the guns and determined that the projectile that the medical examiner retrieved from the body of Mr. Barron was fired from the defendant's Glock. He's also going to testify that the shell casings that were submitted to him, that one of them came from the Glock, and that one of them came from two of them came from the Beretta. So he's going to say that these guns fired these things, and he's going to testify about that. You're going to hear from a toxicologist that did the blood work that was submitted by the medical exam into toxicology, and he's going to tell you that, so be listening for this, because it's, when you listen to some of the statements the defendant made about that the victim had been drinking, he's going to testify that there was no blood, alcohol in Mr. Barron's blood at the time of his death. The medical examiner is going to testify. She's going to tell you the path of the bullet, that it went through the left arm, into the chest, through the left lung, through the thoracic aorta, and into Mr. Barron's right lung, hitting a rib and stopping in the chest cavity. That the cause of Mr. Barron's death was the gunshot wound of the torso and the upper extremity, and that the manner of death is homicide. Now, in addition to all the science and crime lab witnesses, you're going to hear some witnesses that are going to talk about motive. Now, the state doesn't have to prove motive, but it certainly is helpful, especially in a case like this. And so you're going to hear testimony about December 28th of 2024. And that is the day that the defendant found out that Mr. Barron was having contact with Lilia. That's when she first found out about Lilia, and she confronted him. They got in a fight. He wanted to leave. She took his car keys, and she actually pointed a gun at Mr. Barron. Mr. Barron, she finally gave him his car keys, and he left, and he fled to a hotel. You're also going to hear on January 4th of 2025, that on that day, the defendant became upset because she found out, I think she was looking around in Mr. Barron's things, and she found out that he had been sending money to Lilia and her daughter. She became upset about that. Understandably so, it wasn't a smart thing to do. Even Mr. Barron's family didn't like him doing that, but he was doing that. She was becoming increasingly upset about it. And she confronted him, and he again retreated and went to a hotel. You're going to hear testimony about February 1st of 2025 when they are in St. Simon's, when David Barron had gone to visit the defendant in St. Simon's, and they had gone out to dinner, and they were having a nice dinner, but they got in a fight. She started confronting him about Lilia again upset about Lilia. And they were yelling at dinner, and they were yelling when they came back to the condo, and they were yelling outside the condo, and some neighbors or some people that were staying in a nearby unit actually called the police. And the police came out there, and what they actually found out was that David was trying to leave. He was trying to get inside the condo. The defendant had gotten inside the condo. He wanted to get inside and get his things. She would not let him inside. He was trying to open the door to get his things where he could leave. And in doing that, she was pushing against the door, trying to push it closed, and when he was pushing the door open, she fell over and hit her head, and the police came. The police came, they talked to both parties, and they determined that it was an accident and no arrests were made. David was finally able to leave, and he left. And so then you're also going to hear, just continuing on, that there are continued confrontations by the defendant about her dissatisfaction with what Mr. Barron is doing. She's becoming increasingly unhinged and upset about this, and she just cannot move past it. She cannot let it go. He's not listening to her, doing what she wants, and so they get in another fuss. And he goes to that same guest room. He goes upstairs and goes into the guest room to go to bed to avoid her. And she went to sleep at first in the master downstairs, but she couldn't sleep, and so she decided that she was just going to leave and go back to St. Simon. So she did that, but she had been drinking, and so she got arrested for DUI as she was leaving town. And so that's the context for those statements that she makes when she talks to the investigators and the officers about, she makes some comments about why she was driving. So the evidence is going to show that just over time that the defendant became just unhinged. David was not listening to her. She couldn't control what he was doing. He wasn't doing what she wanted him to do. She didn't like what she was doing. She was reaching out to people, sending screenshots of Lilia, complaining about Lilia, and just obsessed with it. So you're gonna hear about that, and then you're also gonna hear and see texts from the defendant to David that will show the state of their relationship, that will show her aggressive and controlling behavior towards him, her frustration with him, and in the context of that, you'll see his calm, reserved, and reasonable reaction to her continued confrontation about that through their text messages. So as you hear the evidence, view the evidence in this case, this is going to be a case not about what or who, but why. So I want you to ask yourself 2 questions as you're hearing the evidence in the case. The first question is, were the defendant's actions reasonable? Was that reasonable? The second question is, why was David Barron, why had he retreated, and why was he hiding back there? And after we've presented all the evidence to you in the case, the evidence is going to show that the defendant was unhinged and obsessed and irrationally angry. And she lost it. She lost it. And she shot David Barron on purpose through that door and killed him. And we'll come back and ask you to find him guilty on all the counts. Thank you. Do you need this?